welcome to the official Lakes International Comic Art Festival podcast. My name's Ian.
And my name's Nikki, bringing you the best in comics and graphic novels and updates from the festival.
Hello, welcome to the Lakes International Comic Art Festival podcast, episode 72, home edition. My name is Ian.
And I'm Nikki.
No,
that was really down.
It was a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Lakes International Comic Art Festival podcast, episode 72.
You could even see that through, could you?
No.
How long have you been on your 80%?
I've been furlonged for a day.
A day, and already?
Been home for 3 days.
Wow. Yeah, we're only on Thursday.
Yeah.
You've been home for 4 days.
Can I explain something to the public? I've got to live with her.
I'm still going out to work.
You're on holiday this week?
I'm on holiday this week. Yeah, I went into work on my holiday. I'm a martyr.
Martyr.
I'm a martyr. I'm still working, thank you very much. So, it'd be lovely just to be paid to stay at home with me.
Need to prepare a lot bloody more. Right, today's episode. Tom reviews Wild Lives by Claire Hubbard. Mike and Pete are back together. Jesus. Doing the Comedy Genre World Cup in what they're calling the Lockdown Mutterdown.
Lockdown Mutterdown.
Lockdown Mutterdown.
All right. Like that now, is it?
And we've been chatting to the mighty one himself, Steve MacManus.
We did.
About 2000 AD and editing and all that goodness.
Yes.
So, currently on lockdown then.
Yes, as you keep going on. 4 days is all you've been off, dear.
4 days. But luckily, there's a host of things to keep us occupied.
Yes.
Let's go through a few bits, shall we?
Go on then.
Comichaus offering a free month.
Yes.
Use the code STAYSAFE.
Is it Stay Safe?
Yes.
Right.
Also, it's changed if that's what
I was going to say, I seem to remember a different one.
Also, get involved in the Comichaus Comic Club that I have set up.
Yes.
I mean, it's been done before thousands of times, but we're doing a new one now. Essentially, I'm setting up a comic each week to read, and then you read it, you review it on the Comichaus site and talk about it. At the minute, it mainly seems to be going on the Awesome Comic Facebook page, the Awesome Comic Podcast. So go and have a nosy there. The first week was Turkey Grove Farms.
Yes.
Which is essentially about killer turkeys.
Killer turkeys.
The next one, which we're doing, is called Bruce. A very short comic by David Cooper, and it is essentially Jaws from the shark's eyes.
Brilliant idea. Munchy munch time.
Some very positive comments already, but we'll look at that in the next episode. And the way I'm doing this is I'm literally scrolling up and down.
Oh, when I say
the list
stop,
of
don't
comics, and I just stop on one. If it's a comic that everybody knows, I may move on. Because there's a few comics out there that literally everybody's read because they're so good. And there's no point talking about those. We want to get
so
stuff
mine won't be on there, obviously.
And we will not be picking yours. No, dear. That will not be happening. But yeah, we want, on the group, I won't go into the full details, but we do want honest feedback. However, we've made it, it's got to be sort of Positive. Well, positive is possibly the wrong word. Constructive is the word. That's the word.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're not going to just be horrible to people. That's not.
And the idea is then to leave a review as well, because reviews obviously help people on the Comichaus app.
Yes.
So get involved in that. Comic Scene have put together a list of free comics for people who are just putting them out there for people to enjoy.
That'd be me then.
That includes Anxiety Me by Nick Bates.
That'd be me. I am so going to heaven.
A Brian Talbot collection, Captain Cosmic's on there, Dungeon Fun, Flintlock. There's loads. Yeah. So I'll put a link onto that.
Yeah, because that covers so many different art styles, stories. You know, that you're going to find something in there that you want to read.
There's loads.
And you can discover more stuff, which is always good.
We've also got Tom Spark and Mark Jackson have set up a YouTube channel each. Brilliant. And they're doing stuff for kids.
Yep,
so
definitely check them out.
Mark Jackson's one is also linked to the Comic Art Festival. Yep. So well worth checking those out. Go and have a nosy. Get your kids in front of the YouTube doing a bit of drawing.
In front of the YouTube.
In front of the YouTube.
Get your kids on the interwebs in front of the YouTube.
And don't draw on the telly.
Don't draw on the telly. Yeah, don't trace things over. Unless you're using whiteboard pens, they might work.
Do you want to risk that?
No.
Also, we'll continue this positive coronavirus thread.
Positive what?
Obviously, a lot of events have been cancelled, we know. But as it stands, the Lakes is full steam ahead for October.
Let's hope we're over it by October.
This is
Come
it.
on.
Things may change. If it is cancelled, ticket monies will be refunded. Tables will be refunded. So there's no risk if you're getting involved or you want to get tickets and so on and so forth.
Do you think hugging will still be available in October? Because I am a hugger.
Unfortunately, Terry Moore's no longer coming because of things being changed and stuff. So he's staying in the States doing some work over there. However, Steve Yeo, I can never say his surname.
No.
Yoel.
There we go.
We actually had an interview with him last year, a brief interview. His work, obviously, on Zenith, being his main comic. He will be here this year.
Yay.
So that's sort of the swap over, but there's more names still to be announced. It's probably going to slow down, I would have thought, for a little bit until it really...
Well, we're all mothballed, aren't we, at the minute? Yeah.
This scene, but yeah. So, as far as you know, Lakes is on, Football's on. October seems to be that. Let's get it going again.
Ready for 2021?
Yes.
We're just wiping 2020 off the maps. Really,
essentially.
We'll just get through this one.
Just do it, then we'll be all right.
We'll just, fine.
But I do hope everyone's all right out there.
Yes, so do I.
Creating comics.
Yeah.
I've started doing Summit.
You have, because, we're on day 4 and already I'm ready to bury under the patio. Well, that's basically what the story's about, isn't it? I'm trying to create something, but I'm not very good at drawing. Everyone is good at drawing.
No.
You have to find your style. That is it. No, I will not have that as an excuse. Everyone can draw. You just have to find your style.
I could have written it and given to you, but it would take 2 months. So,
can't put time on fantastic art.
So I'm trying something. We'll see if it works. If it does, then I'll probably just throw it on Comichaus for people to read and make some money off it.
That was going to pay for your thing.
Well, they don't do it. It's free to read.
Yeah, that's very true.
If I can make enough for a pint that I can't buy.
I was going to say, in what pub?
A 4-pack of lager.
A 4-pack of lager from the supermarket.
Then my work is worthwhile.
Value lager.
But it is challenging trying to, when you haven't got any talent.
Stop. Yes, go on.
Trying to work out how to draw a scene with the limited skills you have. Because I'm no good at drawing people.
Yeah, but that makes it more interesting because you're working to your... This is what I mean about finding your style. You know you can't draw people. I got a style. Then you're finding ways around it to do things you can do. And I think that's amazing. I love seeing how people develop and work.
We'll see.
I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I've only seen the knife and the blood at the moment.
There we go, you see. It's all about being locked in a house.
Are you going to put this is no
Nicole.
Reflection? So mean.
Anyway, let's talk about a couple of comic books, shall we?
Yes. Do we have to?
We do. We'll do Mikel first.
Oh, that's fine. You can talk about that one.
Mikel, give us a blurb off the back.
Mikel has a lifelong dream to become a writer. I have read this one. Seeking to inject some extra cash and inspiration into his life, he uproots his family from their sleepy village to the Basque country, where he takes a job protecting politicians from armed separatist group ETA. Yeah, that's fine. But financial security comes at a price: fear, uncertainty, and family breakdown. Drawn in part from his own experience, Mark Bellido's intense and vivid story finds its perfect countenance.
You're doing well here.
I can't. It's how it's been typed in the back. I'll do that bit again. You might want to cut that bit and then add it in again. Okay. Intense and vivid story finds its perfect counterpart in the bold beauty of Judith Vanistendael's artwork. Together they have created a powerful and troubling graphic novel that probes the consequences of personal conviction and the limits of social responsibility.
So, yeah, Mark and Judith have created Mikel. Her art style, I do like. The colours are very different. not your standard colours that you'd use in a book, and it goes very dark at times very quickly.
Yes, yeah.
But there's still a glow in the design even when it goes dark. It's an interesting style. I do like it. The story...
It reminds me of 1950s pin-up cartoons in some ways.
Yeah, and certainly in some scenes you can see that more than others, but definitely.
Yeah, and I like that different, bringing back that kind of style.
It's quite interesting. It follows the same story of Mikel, who just wants to be a writer. And I think a lot of us have got these aspirations of, we want to do something creative, whether it be a writer, pottery, comic creator, artist, whatever. And you either haven't got the skill to do it, the patience to do it,
the time and money.
Well, being a writer is not the time. The time is there for him, to be fair. It's more that drive and that knowledge and the ability sometimes to actually sit and do it. And you have that dream of, I want to do this. But do you have that conviction to create a piece of work you're trying to do? So it follows the story of him trying to do this whilst trying to keep down a job at the same time. And eventually it leads him to be an investigator, as such a protector. So, and it's seeing how someone who isn't trained to do that job deals with that role, deals with not being at home because they're constantly working stupid hours, which these people do, deals with having a gun, deals with being threatened, and how that affects him and his relationship in this in the story. So interesting. Yeah,
it was an interesting one.
Bit hard at times to read, but overall interesting story. It really went deep at times into the characters, and I think maybe you have to understand the country it's set in as well a bit more than what I certainly did. But worth checking out. Another self-made hero book there. Now the next one is...
That's all you need to say, really.
Deep is a word.
Oh!
that... I thought there's no actual blurb, but do you want to read that beginning bit? So this is Atomic Hercules.
This is Earth, a planet you will not recognise, even though it's where you currently live. In the early 2020s, the politicians of what once was a tiny greeny globe.
You're very rubbish at reading. Have you forgotten how to read?
I'm a little bit tired. Shall I start again? I'm starting again.
For goodness sake.
You've got a lot of editing to do on this one.
This is how we bulk a podcast out.
This is Earth, a planet you will not recognise, even though it's where you currently live. In the early 2020s, the politicians of what was once a tiny green globe would have trouble deciding what shoe to put on in the morning. This resulted in a whole lot of fanning around and non-stop debates about the contents of media degree courses. Consequently, nobody knew how to work nuclear fission, and the world blew up. Not through war or anger or even stupidity. We lost everything because of laziness. Earth is now little more than a brown and grey desert of mutants, robot armies, and a single drunken demigod named Hercules. Things ain't what they used to be.
So, this book can be looked on in multiple levels, in my opinion.
I think the thing you've got to look at is satire.
So, do you want to give a brief over? No.
Okay, I will. Okay, so Hercules, it starts in a pub. Let's just put that one. Yeah, it starts in a pub. Hercules is there. He's basically, he's tired with the world, isn't he? He's tired with people.
I know how it feels.
He's tired with everything. He just wants a quiet pint. Other things, which I won't say because...
Naughty.
And he just wants to get on with it. People just go on and do their own silly stuff. And he just gets drawn into things like all heroes in an adventure story would be. And then it takes a twist on that traditional kind of storyline by adding in the bits that will make some people go, oh my God, you can't do that. Other people just chuckle dirtily, which is what I did. And it's done to be shocking yet funny, yet a great satire on the life and how we look at things in media and everything else today.
So to me, you got the two. You got a snotty person was to read this. Someone who doesn't understand comics.
Yeah,
they'd look at it and say,
Well, this is why there's all this smut around.
Well, let's be honest. Someone who didn't understand comics and didn't understand what they were trying to do with this would look and say, what a piece of crap. And they would. No disrespect to Tony and Adam Falp who created that. That is how it would be. Mm-hmm. To me, however, this is almost a perfect comic. Not perfect in writing or anything like that. Oops. Perfect in the fact that they've decided to say and do what they want to do.
Yeah, brilliant.
They've not thought or concerned about, is this going to upset anybody? Is this going to... none of that. In the case of they wanted to create this funny story, silly story, however you want to look at it, with penises. And the story makes perfect sense. The story is a fun story. It's your typical Hercules-style romp, if that makes sense. It's a typical
Conan the Barbarian, that kind of thing.
It goes in the back about it being the golden age. To me, it's more... It's 70s, but also 80s. I think 80s movies where they really went silly.
Oh, yeah.
The real B movies where they're just a bit over the top.
Yeah.
Flesh gored and stuff like that.
There we go.
Right. Well, it is, though, isn't it? It's just movies that are there for the fun of it.
Yeah.
With a bit of silliness, a bit of sexualisation thrown in. Nobody's going to get offended unless they're stuck up their own. Yeah. And I think this is what comics can do. Because there is nobody breathing down your necks like there is on TV, on radio, watching what you put in.
But also you need people that push the boundaries of the establishment type thing, established ideas. Why not have something? I mean, you would not let your children read this.
Oh, no, it's not for kids in any way, shape or form.
It's a lovely piece of satire for...
If you can keep it away from kids, why should things be made with that in mind? There's enough content for kids.
Yeah.
So that's, there needs to be stuff out there.
Yeah. But I like it. It's two fingers off the establishment type thing. And we need that. That's what it is. It's punk. It's punk into a comic. That's what it is.
Punk in a world that doesn't have punk anymore.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's a punk comic. There you go.
I'm going to twist this back to the Lakes Festival. I don't mean to do. I'm not trying to do promotion on this. It just makes me think that they bring out, not necessarily comics like this, but they bring out the world of comics and art that is so different and hidden in the background.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other things that do it, but they seem to do it really well.
Because you have to break that mould. You have to break the Marvel DC mould. You have to see the full picture of what's
even
out
then
there.
You don't see that sexualised stuff that's out there unless it's shown to you. We wouldn't know.
What about Tom of Finland?
Tom of Finland. And other, well, there's not just that. There's been other events previous years as well.
Yeah.
Where the team like to delve into the darker side.
Yeah.
In essence of comics and art. And we just don't see it on a day-to-day basis unless somebody told you, which there's nothing wrong with it. That's the thing. And it shouldn't be so hidden.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you say, the things like the lakes and everything will showcases certain artists and that, and why not? So
have a look, have a gander at Atomic Hercules if you're over 18.
Over 18,
and
get what I mean by a punk comic. Yeah,
understand what you're going to read.
Yeah,
and you'll enjoy.
Yeah, it's all a bit of silliness.
We need a bit of silliness in this day and age. So that part 2 is coming out soon already. I believe it's already written and already drawn, so it'll be intriguing.
Well, that's good because robots.
Robots would help us right now.
They would take over right now. This is a plan by the robots.
Possibly. So, just a quick, because we're not going to do any more bits after this because we've got Mike and Pete taking over the show shortly.
As if they would.
Just a quick thank you, I think, to obviously all the services again out there doing the fine work, NHS.
Yeah.
Supermarket workers.
Thank you very much.
Police, fire.
I'll take that on behalf of all the supermarket
delivery
workers.
drivers.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, everyone's trying their hardest to keep everything moving, and there's a lot of us still out there.
And all the majority of us to do is stay at home.
Yeah, so all the rest of you just stay at home because don't go shopping in pairs. Just simple things. That 2 metre thing, try and stay away from us. Because we're in there all the time.
And if you are stuck at home, then just try and make something like I'm doing.
Yeah, try something new. Do anything, learn the guitar. I don't know.
Learn a guitar. You need to have a guitar.
I know. You can make one out of elastic bands.
Whittle the wood.
Whittle one out of some wood.
Out of a pallet.
Got some elastic bands, you got your strings.
Actually, you can get apps on the iPad that almost...
Oh, yes, you can do that. Yeah, now's the time to get all your Netflix and everything subscriptions. Just sit and veg and expand on the sofa.
And if you want to hear a bit more nerdy stuff, then we've also got the House of Geek podcast, which is brand new, now available.
Yes.
On iTunes. That's us just rambling.
Yeah.
Nerd stuff.
Nerdy
not just
stuff.
comic stuff.
Yeah. Brought it back from the dead.
Back from the dead. Not the right word. Let's go.
Oh, I didn't mean it like that.
Right, please enjoy a chat with Steve MacManus.
Room for one lawgiver, please.
Ah, Judge Dredd. Or is it just Dread? Fancy seeing you here.
Catwoman, you also here for the Comic Art Festival or a stint in the ISO cubes?
Of course. I love to see my makers in action. Ah! Watch it, Greenie!
Careful, Hulk. In this town we have a saying. Once is a coincidence, twice is a booking offence.
I think he booked the events on the website.
Huh?
Comicartfestival.com. It's got all the perfect information about the event.
Yeah, so's my fist. Druck, I'm out of here. Not standing around with those 4 tortoises that have just entered the building. Cowabunga, dude!
Find out all about the Lakes International Comic Art Festival and booking information at www.comicartfestival.com.
On this episode, we have the mighty one himself, Steve MacManus. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem at all. So we always talk about comics that you grew up on when we start these interviews. So back in the day, what were you reading?
Okay, I was the youngest of 4 boys, so I was reading what they were reading to begin with, which was Eagle comic.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Then I actually found myself going round the corner to a local shop and buying DC comics, Superman mainly, and collecting those till the age of 10. And then I started reading the British comics, Lion, Valiant, and some of the DC Thompson stuff as well.
Was there a particular American comic character you preferred out of them all, or?
Well, I guess I'm quite dull. I like Superman.
Oh, Nikki won't like that.
Well, don't say that.
Well, allow me for the fact that there was this kind of bottled city called Kandor, was it? And he used to dive into this bottle city. Well, that was the best bit. He'd come down like David Bowie through the sky, a hand reaching down, and solve their problems.
Okay.
Oh, we're going to have to find it now.
I'll be honest, neither is a huge Superman fans. I must admit, I'm more Batman than Superman. I like the dark. I like the dark and gritty.
No, I'm a wimp.
So you moved on to the British comics, you say. Was there something that stood out there as well? Was that more your teenage years, I'm guessing, then?
Actually, not too much for teenage years. Just say maybe from 10 to 12. Mm-hmm. Just before kind of adolescence, puberty kind of thing. So Valiant, it was just fun. It had all these characters written, as far as I could tell, by Tom Tully, The Wild Wonders, and Janus Stark, Steel Claw. But more important than that equally important were the artists, Eric Bradbury, Mike Weston, a guy who lived in Spain called Roy Lawrence, and they all had agents, so but I didn't know that at the time, of course.
No. So how did you get into working within comics then?
Actually, it was a kind of a wrong turn. I was going down this motorway, as it were, of life, and I wanted to work on a football magazine. Mm-hmm. But when I pitched up at their offices, they said, "There's no work here, boy." But there is a job going in, quote, the comics, with a slight sneer, the comics. Mm-hmm. So I found myself working on the very comic I'd begun to read as a child, which was Valiant.
Oh, brilliant!
That's pretty. How did that feel?
Yeah,
it was brilliant because you were then shown how the kind of behind the scenes of how this thing that you bought every week came to be made, and how big the artwork was. Huge, great rolls of artwork, and all the processes and stuff coming in from Spain, as I said, with agents, and there was a special guy who had to come in and draw the jokes for the letters page.
Okay.
It was all well planned, and then wham bam, I found myself writing the letters, choosing the letters and stuff. It was great.
So what was your actual role then within that? Is it sub-editor, is that right?
Correct, yes.
So what is the role of a sub-editor?
As I recall, then it was to, when the artwork came in, to sub the dialogue against what the artist had drawn, to make sure that he'd followed it correctly, to do the letters page, to write the top lines for the front cover, to read the proofs, that kind of stuff. There was no commissioning involved. You weren't meant to talk to writers or talk to the agents. You were the boy at the back of the room doing the nuts and bolts.
It sounds more important than that, sub-editors, to me. It sounds much more... Anything with editing sounds much more important than that, but yeah. You also became the action man for Action, is that right? What was that all about?
Well, it was all about, in short, me being paid £10 a stunt.
Now, that you see, as soon as you say stunt, that to me is thinking jumping cars over rivers, but I'm guessing it's not to that extent. What sort of things? What sort of things have you doing?
Well, these were stunts suggested by the readers of Action Comic. But before they could get the suggestions in, because the mail doesn't come in till issue 6 kind of thing, people in the office would suggest stunts that I could do. And there was the finance officer suggested I be dropped into the North Sea.
Oh, God.
Okay.
To be rescued by the lifeboat nearby. I said, no, I won't do that.
That's a bit too much for you, £10, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Exactly. Yeah. My dad wasn't too happy about the whole thing, being a kind of neurotic doctor. But yeah, the stunts were. He was really worried when I went down the sewers.
Oh gosh.
Because he knew all the diseases you could pick up down there.
Yeah.
That didn't bother me. I like going to the circus best to meet El Hakim. He taught me how to breathe fire, walk on stilts, lie on a bed of nails, all in a thick Yorkshire accent.
Superb. And you got paid for the pleasure as well. That is brilliant.
Well, £10 a week in them days was pretty cool. It was half my salary, I think. So immediately I was getting paid about £27 a week to be the sub-editor. I had £10 for Action Man.
Yeah.
And before I knew it, I thought, well, then of course when I started writing for Action, before I knew it, I had £2,000 in my kind of building society account.
I'd be happy with £2,000 in my account now.
Yes.
I agree with you. But then I met a girl who spent it all in restaurants.
Oh, so. There we go.
We do.
I don't mean to say a girl, someone who took me to restaurants.
So you moved on in 78, became the sub-editor for 2000 AD. How did you find this move into such a big comic, essentially, wasn't it?
Yeah, because before that I'd been on Star-Lord, so they merged the two.
Okay.
And the sub-editor at the time in 2000 found himself moved to Battle, and me put in his place, which was awkward for him and me. He being Nick Landau, now president of Titan, the Titan Books empire, and all those shops.
He's doing all right for himself then.
Yeah, so he did okay. Yeah, exactly. And it was a bit awkward because the other 3 people in the office were, upset that he'd gone. Here I was. Mm-hmm. But the way I solved that was I took them to the pub and made them drink gin and tonic till it came out of their ears.
See, that's where your £2,000 went. Don't blame any women. So, how did you find 2000 AD different to Valiant, or was it same sort of boat?
Well, the production process was exactly the same. 32 pages every week, please. But the actual editorial content and style was obviously a move on from like Smoking Heroes to grim and gritty stuff, which I loved. Yeah, I loved it, and I loved the science fiction aspect, or what I would say the future fiction aspect. Mm.
Yeah. Okay, so the following year is when you became the editor. So how old were you then? I
think I was quite young. 23 maybe, or no, hold on. 30, say 30 years old.
30, still young for what was back then obviously huge. So how did that feel, given that responsibility?
Well, it's quite scary.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Very scary. Actually, I know now. I was, I think it was 78, so I was 25. Very scary. As I've written in my first memoir, the mighty one, My Life Inside the Nerve Center, when Kelvin came in, the Gosnell, the previous editor, and said, "You are now in charge. I've had an argument. I'm not doing this anymore." I sat down and I realized suddenly, in the space of a minute, I was now in charge of a staff of 4, about 30 freelance artists and writers, and the responsibility of getting 2000 AD to the printers every week.
That's, scary.
Yeah, in the space of a minute, yes.
It's scary in the space of longer than that, never mind.
Yeah.
So what was your plan? Because obviously many people class a period that you ran the comic as sort of a golden age. Did you have a plan once you got settled in on how to make this comic what you wanted it, or did it sort of just slowly merge into the comic it was?
I got lucky because Prog 86 was the merger with Star-Lord, so immediately 2000 AD gained Strontium Dog and Robusters.
Okay, yes.
So I got so lucky then. And then from there I looked ahead to Prog 100 and I thought, well, we can make Prog 100 equally kind of jumping on point. That's the word they use now. And that's what I looked forward to with Prog 100, building on the kind of good wishes of the readers who had come over from Star-Lord and those on 2000 who'd been sort of excited to greet these new heroes. So,
is there any particular moment that makes you laugh when you think back? Anything funny that stood out?
Not that I can repeat over the air.
Too many gin and tonics, I reckon.
Well, I mean, John Wagner edited Valiant for a while, and he was doing a great job in turning it into a similar kind of gritty, comic. From what it had been, he introduced One-Eyed Jack, which we all know was a kind of precursor, perhaps, to Judge Dredd. Mm-hmm. And I used to pop down to see how he was getting on. And one morning I went into the office and his back was to me and he was typing away, and he turned round and I got the shock of my life because he was wearing a gorilla mask. So that made me laugh. But I can't think of things. It was pretty tough, you know. It wasn't so much. I don't know that I'm kind of like quite a glass half empty guy, so I don't really have much of a sense of humour, or find much stuff funny. I've always seen the downside. I mean, you talked earlier about the dark side. Well, I'm the downside of. I don't feel very well, actually. I think I'll just die here.
Well, you're not coughing, so we're all right there. Something that's always intrigued me about, well, any comic, but 2008 in particular, is the front covers, because I adore the covers. And the period I read, they keep popping up, the covers, and you're like, oh, I read that one, because they stand out. How do you go about choosing the covers, and what's the plan? Do you plan down the line, I'm assuming, or?
I would say to myself, having read all the scripts for the issue, well, bearing in mind what was on the previous week, we should maybe put this story on the cover, this character. Then, either the art editor, Robin Smith, would come up with a design, a kind of layout for the artist we chose to follow, or we would just ring up the artist and say, for example, Mike McMahon, Mike, can you do us a dread cover for that script that you've just drawn in episode 6 or whatever it was? So it's quite organic process.
Okay.
But the big jump-on issues, free gift issues, generally were designed by Doug Church before Robin got fully controlled. And we know that Doug designed all the battle covers and the early 2000 AD covers, so it was very much an art-driven thing once I'd chosen who it should be.
Excellent. Also, during that time, obviously, you worked with some amazing names. You've always mentioned John Wagner, Alan Grant, Pat Mills, Alan Moore, as many. Is there a particular creator that stood out over that period, and why?
Well, I think each of those names you mentioned stood out for a different reason. So Pat Mills, for his kind of the way every script he wrote was picture driven. Mm-hmm. You'd read the script and it would be like someone punching in the face because the picture was wham, 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 which made for a great visual experience. Whereas, say, John Wagner, it was more character-driven, stories, slow burn, and that drew you in before kind of like the punch came at the end. Alan Moore was just, hilarious, really. When I was reading Halo Jones, I really couldn't get my head around it at all, his scripts. I couldn't find a way in, but we got them off to Ian Gibson. When they came back, then I saw what Alan had been visualizing his end. So that was okay. But sometimes, John Smith's scripts are pretty dense. So Steve Dillon, R.I.P., God bless his soul, used to say to me when he was drawing a John Smith script, he'd get a highlight pen, and the scene descriptions were as long as an Alan Moore, but that's kind of cogent, if that's the word. So Steve would just highlight the sentence that he needed to draw the picture.
Okay.
So that's the writers, I guess. The artists were the stars. They got their work in bang on time, and it was all great.
So back then, I'm guessing, was it postage with artists, or did you generally live around the area of the office? How did it work?
Obviously the European artists posted their work into an agent who brought it in. Mm-hmm. Dave Gibbons, Mick lived in St Albans, so they would either train their artwork in, because they liked to come into the office and look at what other artists were doing. Brian Bolling lived just around the corner, so he'd come in, and that's how that kind of what would you call it, that artist community, by seeing each other's work before it was printed, got inspired. So it was a bit like the sun. It was a self-generating explosion of talent.
That's brilliant.
Any particular characters that stood out over that time?
Well, for me, it's always been Rogue Trooper.
Yeah.
Because working on Battle, which I don't think we mentioned, that's kind of, I grew up with the Second World War through comics and aunts and uncles telling me about their experiences.
Yeah.
So I've always been a war fan, and I loved the way the Rogue Trooper kind of took anxiety to a different planet. And then, the question is he imagining these 3 biochips, or are they real in a sense? Is it a dream in his head? So that's what I liked best.
Yeah, I must admit, I was a Rogue Trooper fan as a teen. I must admit, loved it. I think I was a bit too young to fully understand the comic when I was reading it, but it was the action in it that just pulled me in. I loved Rogue Trooper, I must admit.
Nikki, were you reading this?
No, I didn't get my hands on a 2000 AD. I lived in a very small village where we had one very small shop. So yes, but it was Dandy and Beano for me, I'm afraid. I didn't get my hands on anything like this till I was a lot older.
Well, actually, Nikki, I forgot to mention that I was a Beano reader for quite a while as well. Corporal, Clot, and that boy who had a robot army and all that. I loved that.
Yes, yeah. So that's what I grew up with. I was in the Dandy Pie Eaters Club.
And you've still got the badge, Nikki.
I've still got the badge, I have. I've still got the little wallet.
Damn. I don't have a badge.
It has a little sheriff's badge in it.
Oh no, I'm so jealous.
I must admit, I did start on the Beano myself as well, but then I think as a lad, you just want a bit more. And you see 2000 AD on that shelf at W.H. Smith or wherever, and you're like, that's it. I've got to give that a shot.
Yeah.
Amazing. Right, we're going to jump into a couple of quick questions, completely random.
Okay.
What was the last meal? I mean, this is probably a bad one to ask right this second, but what was the last meal you ate in a restaurant?
It was a cottage pie.
Nice. British.
Yeah.
We'll stay with that. What was the last comic you read?
Actually, one of these small press things, Edge of Extinction by James Baden Maloney, which is quite prescient because it's all about a pandemic.
Oh, no.
Have you heard of it?
No, I've not actually. No.
Edge of Extinction, yeah.
No, I have heard of it.
Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I've seen it on Twitter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, so it's worth reading.
He sent it to me, so I thought I'd read it and give him a plug.
What was the last TV series you finished watching in full?
Well, oh God, it was oh God, just say Breaking Bad.
Super, thank you. So we like to jump onto silly questions just to change it up a bit. Right, okay. So after 2000 AD, it was the launch of Crisis, is that right?
Correct.
What was the plan behind Crisis in comparison to what you've done with 2000 AD?
Okay, stop me if I don't say this in 25 words. So we got to Prog 500 of 2000 AD, and it occurred to me it was time to let someone else have a go,
Yeah.
someone else edit it. I told the management I was leaving, and I was going to go to America because everyone wants to do Americana. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll pay your salary for 3 months. And when you come back from America, you bring back some ideas for a superhero comic that we can sell back to the Americans. So I thought, well, this is a good idea. So I came back and handed the reins of 2000 AD over to Richard Burton, who recruited Alan Mackenzie, and they recruited Steve Cook, and they became a unit. And I picked up the phone and I called Pat Mills and I said, going to do this. Would you like to contribute to this comic about superheroes? And he was quite interested. Meantime, I'd actually become quite close with John Smith. I knew that somewhere in there was something that would look good in pictures, and so I called him up and said, I've got an idea, I want you to write it. And my idea was New Statesman, which is a superhero thing. Meantime, Pat called me back and said, actually, I don't want to do superheroes. I want to do kind of something called Third World War. And I thought, well, this is the guy who wrote Charlie's War. How can it go wrong? So I said yes. But what we ended up with, therefore, was not a superhero comic, but half a superhero comic and half a very interesting story. But one perhaps the Americans wouldn't latch onto.
Yeah.
So that's the story.
Okay. And within that as well, you brought on those names, like Sean Phillips, Garth Ennis, Duncan Fegredo. How does it feel knowing that you sort of helped, and it's not just those names, I'm sure there's plenty of other names as well, you've helped these creators sort of start their careers? It must be quite a proud moment when you think back to that.
Well, that's very kind of you. I think the thing was, what Crisis became somewhere where people who couldn't get into 2000 AD could find work. And to be fair to them, they came all the way down from Kendal and Yorkshire and Leeds, and they brought their work with them to show me in the office next to 2000 AD. And I just thought, wow, we've got to use these guys. And they were so pleasant and nice and hardworking, talented, of course. So I'm just pleased that their first kind of like steps in comics were through Crisis, and it's nice to look back on that. And I've been to Lakes International Comic Art Festival a couple of years ago, and I did a panel with, as you probably know,
we recorded it actually, yeah.
You recorded that, yeah, and good old Pete Doherty as well. So I just feel brilliant about it.
Yeah, it's such a good British scene of creators out there, small press and obviously big names like that. It's brilliant. How do you see the scene overall in UK at the moment? It seems to be very, very vibrant. We're kind of like the small press end. Yeah.
So that's to be a good thing, I guess. There's a revival, obviously, of interest in the medium per se, with all the comic festivals and comic cons, so that's a good thing. Where it goes from here, I don't know, but it sounds good to me.
Yeah, there's, as I say, so many creators, small press wise, that we're just waiting to move on and do something more. But yeah, it's great, love it. So why did you leave Crisis in the end? I believe there was an issue with censorship. Is that right?
Well, actually, Crisis folded because it wasn't making money. But there was a story called Skin that Brendan and Pete Milligan, I loved it, about someone they knew in their youth, a skinhead. But he was actually a product of a pregnancy pill that actually produced birth defects. And the printers didn't like the pictures of someone with no arms or no legs. So that kind of like was, I guess, when the management began to think, well, actually, Crisis isn't, we're actually moving towards more of a Disney-fied company. We've got the Disney license. Do we really want this guy, Steve, in this room bringing out this quite political stuff? And so I didn't leave, but Crisis just kind of like
disappeared.
It had done its bit, and I think it will be remembered for, as you said earlier, about providing a platform for new talent that may never, ever, ever have come to light.
Yeah. So since then, 2016, you did the memoirs, The Mighty One, My Life Inside the Nerve Centre. How was it looking back and writing all those stories?
Oh, it was great. It was greght. I had to do a lot of research to remind myself.
Is that the gin and tonics again?
Exactly. And so I had to kind of remember all the, all the kind of human stories that would, like Tom Tully giving huge, loud, turning head burps in a restaurant. Matt Smith said to me, that's because a lot of what I wrote everyone knew, but he said that little snippets like that, Matt Smith, the editor of 2000 AD, said, added to the canon of what 2000 AD was like, or comics before then. And he was like that, Tom Tully. He'd always start with a prawn cocktail. And then before the main course would come, there'd be this amazing, and it wouldn't just be a hidden burp, he'd actually put his arms out, turn around like a gladiator to the restaurant. This is 1975. Oh, God. So that was fun, remembering those.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So after writing that, how do you sum up your own career in comics?
Yeah. Well, it was from 1973 at the age of 20 to about 2011. But I suppose the real career in comics was from Prog 78 to Prog 500. Mm-hmm. Then a bit of Crisis, a bit of Revolver, a bit of Judge Dredd magazine. But to sum it up, it was, I'd love to do it all again. Unfortunately, I can't find my time machine.
It's because you didn't work on those Doctor Who comics.
Yeah. How does that sound?
Yeah, no, that's great. So, what are you working on now? Because you've been working on the 77 as well.
Yes. I think this is a great another example of sort of people doing it for themselves. So there's what's that song? Sisters doing it for themselves. Yeah, it's come on, grassroots revival. Yeah, I wrote a script in the Sheer Glam Conspiracy, which is my first novel, and Ben K. Sai said to me, "Can I borrow that for the 77?" And it ended up in the hands of this great New Zealand artist called Brendan Wright. And he reminds me of Casanovas, this Spanish artist who drew some comical stuff for 2000 AD. So, it's kind of like I'm back in track, Right. I'm on tour.
So have you got any other future plans? Have you got any other stories you want to tell?
I don't think so in these times of woe, but I am looking forward to, I hope it isn't cancelled, but this year's Comic Art Festival in Kendal.
As of yet, it's still going ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I've got a table reserved, sharing half with Big Jim Stewart, who does Ganja Man comics.
Okay.
And I love the Saturday evening hijinks.
Yes. Gin and tonics again.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I think it's called the Shakespeare, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Because the first time I was there, they had a pool table. And second time I went there, the landlord said to me, no, the pool table's downstairs. We've upgraded. So, we shall see. But if you guys are there, you can buy me a gin and tonic.
We will do.
Yes, do as we're told. So, if people are interested in your book, is there a particular place they can get it? Is it all over, or have you got a website yourself?
It's best to order it direct from me. That way you don't have to support Amazon or B. And also it means I can inscribe it or let me know. And when I'm coming up in October, I can bring a few copies. Mm-hmm. There's no rush. But if you are desperate and you're living in Africa or in South America, it's from Amazon. But it's the postage is pretty steep, I think.
Mm. But no, now's the perfect time to sit when you're stuck in the house and
definitely
and grab a copy and have a read.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought that. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect time.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time this evening. We'll definitely come and say hi in October.
Yep.
Okay.
Fingers crossed it all goes ahead. I'm sure
It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. It's ages off. It'll be fine.
I think positive.
Yes.
Okay, Ian. Okay, Nikki, good to talk to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right. How do we end this?
And we do that. We just stop.
There you go.
Done.
All right.
Hello everybody and welcome to Small Pressed, the review section of the Comic Art Festival podcast with Tom. I hope you're all staying really safe and nice and healthy, but we're going to not dwell on that and we're going to get into some comics. How's about that? So today I am here to talk about an absolutely beautiful comic that I think is exactly what's needed at a time like this, to be honest. I'm just going to read the blurb from the back. Wild Lives is a collection of stories that take an imaginative look at the behaviour, biology and conservation status of some of the UK's native wild animals. Venture into the wilderness to discover a river otter's appetising approach to preparing meals, the dating dilemmas of a Scottish wildcat, and the terrifying threat to our natural landscape. It may not be what you expect. It's Wild Lives by Claire Hubbard. And to get a wee glimpse of the outdoors and beautiful landscapes and everything in this absolutely gorgeously illustrated comic is exactly what everybody needs just now. A nice bit of escapism into the wild, and the wilds of Scotland at that. This book was comprised and made up out of a time that Claire actually took a year to do like an artist residency at Rahoy Hills Nature Reserve. She's written like a little introduction on the inside that's nice. It gives you a nice little context to the book. The first two opening pages actually are really nice in the fact that you've got that context and then you've got like almost a picture comic story. It's not really so much a story, but it just gives you a wee bit of sort of context to the introduction as well. And it's just nice seeing a kind of wee setup of the sort of animals you would expect to find in the Scottish Highlands, and kind of almost setting the tone for the rest of the comic as well. This is an absolutely beautiful piece. I'm a big fan of Claire's style. It really harkens to a very simplistic, illustrative sort of style that I really enjoy. I'm reading a lot of James Kachaka at the minute, and it gives a lot of that kind of vibe to it. These things seem really effortless, but you know at the crux of it there has been a lot of hard practice and work that's went into this. And Claire has a good back history behind her as well of doing multiple pattern designs and stuff for her Etsy. She does a lot of like wrapping papers and iPhone covers and tea towels and all that kind of stuff, but she designs all of it, and it's all kind of animals and stuff like that as well, predominantly. She does do other ones as well, but yeah. But the style is just absolutely beautiful, very simplistic, very lovely, nice, neat, clean lines to each bit as well, not necessarily joining, giving it that kind of more childlike appeal to it as well. But it's just so absolutely beautiful, and I was so glad to see that this comic is all full colour as well, and all done. It looks like watercolour. I'm assuming it's watercolour. I'm assuming it's not done digitally, because there is such a nuance in the colour changes and stuff as well that doesn't look like you'd be able to do digitally. It very much looks like it's been all done by hand, which is lovely, absolutely beautiful. But it's a really striking front cover. All the animals that kind of appear in the comic on the front, all in different poses around a wooden sign that just says Wild Lives and then Claire Hubbard underneath, with a really nice, unique font as well. Really lovely. And it even has a kind of wildlife pattern on the inside as well, which I would love to have on a shirt, actually. I've spoken to Claire before about this. I saw it at Thought Bubble when I bought this book, actually. And I'd said that there was many of her designs I would love to see put on a shirt, not a t-shirt, like an actual shirt, because the repetition all over a shirt would just be absolutely lovely. So it works. Her designs really do work well with what she creates. You know, all the Nintendo covers and all that kind of stuff. It really works well with it, and she's got a good grasp of the kind of things that she's creating as well. A really good grasp of the content. So back into the comic. This is just beautiful. It's so accessible for everybody as well. None of it's hard to read. Every part of it is explained away and done in a way that you understand it. It's simple. It flows really well. You can really tell the kind of love of animals and wildlife throughout this as well. You can really tell when somebody's got a grasp on what they're speaking about and knows the sort of ins and outs like the back of their hand. And this is unbelievable, but this is extremely well researched as well. Each animal that's on the inside has a page to themselves with like facts all around it. So there's the animals painted beautifully on the middle of the page, and then there's like these sort of laid out little mini illustrations that go around it, and these kind of facts. So like the first one, the otter, there's a picture of the otter and it's got little arrows pointing to different parts of it saying sleek, streamlined body, small ears, waterproof fur, muscular tail to aid swimming and balance. And then there's like these little facts. So there's a bit where at the bottom left hand corner there's a paw that's illustrated. It just says otters' paws are perfectly formed for swimming. They have webbing between their toes which helps them push against water like a paddle. And that has a little sort of headline that says paddle paws. It's really nice, but it has this introduction page of like a fun fact. It reminds me of the kind of Filofax fun fact pages that you used to get as a kid. So you get that one page and then it goes into a story of that animal. So the first one's otter cooked. And it's like a little otter having like a chef's show. But the story itself teaches you something about that animal without directly shoving it there in plain view. It's a funny story, or it's a really nice and cute, like well done story that could appeal to everybody, because it doesn't kind of pander in a way. You know, it's got the otter thrown up in amongst it, but that is a way that an otter feeds its children and stuff, and it's really well crafted. I really like the way that it's done. I honestly cannot fault this. There's nothing I could pick apart from it. The colours have been picked perfectly, the content's been picked perfectly, it's been extremely well researched. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And it just kind of goes like that. So you get the first page of the animal, and then you get sort of 3 pages of story after that as well. And they're all these sort of unique little stories as well. So you've got otter cooked for an otter, you've got burrow for sale for a mole, you've got stripe out for a cat. I mean, it's just like a wild cat as well. But they're split into these little sections, and it's just beautiful. And at the end as well, I'm saying it's really well researched. She's actually got a bibliography and further reading. So you've got a list of websites, you've got a list of books, she's even got little final thoughts. There's a little picture of the author and about the artist and stuff like that at the end. It's a really well-rounded, well-fleshed-out book. You know, it's a little sort of A5, 30-page comic. For A5 comics, I usually have a problem because they're priced funny. People price them all differently. Now, I realise people create work. You charge whatever you want, you know, but sometimes I do personally begrudge paying sort of above £5 for a sort of A5 comic. Now, this was actually £7, and I tell you, it's worth the £7. It's really worth the £7. You get a lot out of this. You get multiple readability to it. Like I say, it appeals to all ages. It's a beautiful, bright, well-illustrated book, well-constructed. And even in the printing, I mean, just a very nice, simple, well-put-together book. Definitely check it out. Wild Lives by Claire Hubbard. You can actually check out a lot of Claire Hubbard's work on Etsy. There's 3 comics up there. She compiled the anthology, I think around 2016, maybe 17. Video Games for Good. Had a lot of different artists and like their memories of video games, and that was an extremely well put together book. And that was, I mean, as a comic, that's £7 up on Etsy as well. But that's got a hell of a lot of pages to it. I remember that was quite a chunky A5 thing. And there's The Cats That Stared as well, which is one of the earlier comics by Claire Hubbard. But yeah, check her out on Etsy, but you can also get her on our website, which is www.emseeitch.mch. You can also get her on Twitter at MCH. I'll just say that again so you've got it as EMSEEITCH. That's Claire Hubbard. Honestly, well worth a look. I put her work kind of on the same level as two Claires, actually. Claire Spiller. I mean, for content-wise, probably, more than anything. But the style, definitely like a James Kachalka or a kind of Kate Beaton, or even maybe like a Lucy Knisley, actually, when I think about it. That kind of nice, simple strokes, very effortless, but definitely gets all the mass detail without really illustrating loads of stuff. It's brilliant. Absolutely love it. Wild Lives by Claire Hubbard. Definitely check that out. Pick that up. And before I go, there isn't actually a lot of Kickstarters and stuff on at the minute. There is some, but a lot of people have quite rightly been delaying a lot of their Kickstarters at the minute. So there's only a couple that I want to point out. Now, at time of recording, The Junction by Norm Conyo that I spoke about before is still on. It's only got 71 hours to go at the moment. So just a little over 2 days. Definitely pick that up. I mean, he's absolutely smashed the goal. It is unbelievable. It's just so good. I'm so glad to see it as well because it's such a good, solid comic. So check that out. That's on Kickstarter. Also, issues 9 to 11 of Merrick the Sensational Elephant Man. That's just started, actually. There's 32 days to go. So give that a check out, definitely. I mean, there's absolutely beautiful art and a good story to that overall. I've only read a couple of issues of Merrick, actually, but what I have read, I've really thoroughly enjoyed. It gets spoken very highly of on a lot of different platforms, actually. Well worth checking out, definitely. And writer James McCulloch and artist Jonathan Scott and letterer Rob Jones have actually got a comic that's on Kickstarter just now. At the time of recording, it's only got 5 days to go. It's not that far off its goal. You push it over the line. It's Camp VA07, issue 1. I've been hearing a lot about this actually recently. I've not checked it out myself until just now. But James is a really nice guy. And Rob is just an absolute lettering juggernaut. Like, unbelievable. The art looks really lovely on this actually. I do like the look of this. Different kind of story. Go on and check that out. That's Camp VA07, issue 1. And I've not heard much else about any other Kickstarters that are going about. Like I say, a lot of them have been delayed and whatnot. But if you do have any Kickstarters that are going through over the next wee while, get in touch and I can give them a wee shout out at the end and see if it makes a difference in any way, shape or form. Aside from that, there's been a lot of people putting up their free comics online to get people through being bored, stuck at home. So there's been a lot of kind people putting up a lot of different comics. I mean, I saw Good Comics put out a little pack. I'm not going to start listing them all off, but I saw Good Comics had put out a pack. I'd seen a couple of other folks had put out their free comics here and there as well. But they've all been kind of collected together, all the links and everything. There's been people collecting them all up, like Pipe Dream Comics and the Awesome Comics guys on their Awesome Talk on their Facebook page. There's like a section with all the free comics and stuff where people are popping them up. So yeah, go check them out. Also across on our podcast, That Comic Smell, we're actually doing a section called Nando's Comic of the Day, where Nando will suggest a comic to read every single day, and he puts up pictures along with it and stuff as well, so that's been going up every day. Check it out. And also Ian and Nikki are doing a reading group and picking a title from Comichaus and reading about it, so go across and check that out on our Twitter. And that is it for Small Press this time. Please, everybody, wash your hands, stay extra safe, and go and enjoy some comics. And I'll see you later. Bye for now.
How do? Welcome to a special lockdown edition of Mutterdowns, the yakking endlessly about comics section of the podcast. I'm Pete Taylor. I'm a small press comics creator and illustrator. Online, I trade as This Man, This Pete. And as always, the mutterings will be supplied by...
Mike Williams. I am a general fanboy, geek and all-round otaku, and you can find me online on Twitter at CthulhuPunk.
Now, everyone is obviously experiencing life as we normally experience it, sat at our desks and video conferencing to yak endlessly about comics. Suddenly, everybody's life is like ours, sat in front of machines and not going outdoors. So, how's it been for you?
Interesting. Not the hugest of difference when it comes to working life. I'm a software developer and I code from home anyway. And like you said, I spend most of my working day Skyping or WebExing. So from that point of view, not a lot of difference. But unfortunately, thanks to a kidney transplant, I'm also one of those vulnerable lot you keep hearing about. So I'm in it for the long haul. So I've got 12 weeks of isolation. Okay. Hey, and so's my partner Alison. She loves me.
Yeah. So, I mean, apart from both girls now being in the house permanently as well, me and my wife work side by side in our studio downstairs. So our working day hasn't changed a great deal. Non's now just working remotely with everybody as opposed to contacting the office. My work is all generally done through email and the odd phone call. So yeah, there's nothing really changed. And the amount of work that we're doing hasn't changed really. The girls, bless them, are trying to keep strict timetables as they would be at college and uni. So they are working on all of their academic projects during the day. And then, we're just meeting up and try and get all of the binge-worthy stuff that everybody else is watching done at night.
And I guess we're in the same situation. I'm classed as a key worker, as I'm keeping the country's financial infrastructure alive. You can thank me later. And you're self-employed, so kind of you have to work. And I'm just getting hassled constantly by everyone else I know that's trying to drag me into online D&D games, or let's play Call of Duty, or hey, let's just tweet cat photos constantly from 9 till 5. So I think that's the most difficult part of it for me so far. So everyone else I know seems to be having a little bit of fun with it.
And assuming that everybody else is, having worked from home for the time we've been here in Swansea, you do get those people who kind of like, we ring you up and go, "Are you busy?" It's like, we work from home. We're always busy in work hours. But Non's just had to learn how to mute conversations in WhatsApp for that very reason. The constant knocking notifications of another funny toilet roll video. It's driving her up the wall sometimes. We have managed to do some of those things, though, like everybody is, taking advantage of the time. So we finally got a family D&D game together, which has been threatened for many years. Awesome. So I've got my old DMing boots back on, which it's not been for quite a while. And we had our character creation session the other day. So I think my wife rolled up a ranger called Willow. My youngest daughter Nancy rolled up a rogue called Ajax. And Daisy has rolled up a monk. Still a little undecided on the name, I think. But I can't really remember what she was going through. But yes, possibly connected to a hippo temple, which is going to be interesting.
That's awesome. I've had to cancel all physical games, but hey, Roll20 is allowing me to game online. And I had to laugh the other day when somebody was complaining that they couldn't really find, any proper board games to play. And it's just like, we have our living room wall of board games, doesn't everyone?
Yes, we have got a few. The last one we bought was the Samurai Jack. Back in Time board game, which, I mean, apart from looking gorgeous, is a lot of fun as well. But we just haven't had time. Just managed to get a bit of Mandalorian in, like most people, I suppose. But yeah, no, it's remarkably similar to our normal life, really, strangely. But
so it kind of got us thinking, didn't it, really, about we need something in this time of isolation to try and do something a little bit different, I suppose, with our podcast slots. Yes. So we've come up with the World Cup of comic genres. And I'm going to try and explain this. And a bit like everything else in the world right now, this has been evolving and changing on a daily basis. So I hope I've got this right.
Yes, according to the briefings we've had between each other.
So we've got, we whittled down to a grand total of 16 main comic genres. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to do in World Cup fashion is we're going to do a series of groups where they're all going to play. We're going to draw one for you and one for me to play against each other.
Yep.
We're going to basically explain a little bit about the genre for that match, a little about what it means to us, what's good about it, highlights, and then we're going to go into a penalty shootout where we're simply going to name what we think are the 5 most important titles.
Yep.
And hopefully have a winner, which will then go through to the quarterfinals. So that's how all the group games are going to play. And we've done we've kind of divided them into the groups, but we'll draw what plays what for each episode. And then when it comes to quarterfinals, we're hoping, in the spirit of self-isolation and bringing people together, that we're going to get a few more different voices, hopefully, to join in the conversation. So wait and see on that one, but it's going to be a few episodes on.
But we have a feeling they're not going anywhere, so I think we're safe. And it's also... Sorry?
We're going to play 2 matches on this episode?
Yes. And also part of the idea as well, isn't it, is in this time of needing extra distractions, possibly putting forward some titles and ideas for reads that are going to help pass the time for the listener. I think regular listeners, if there are any, will recognise, of course, a few favourites that always come back up. But we always find some new characters or titles to put forward. And interestingly enough, there are a lot of free issues available online from some publishers, particularly Image. So I will point out when the first issue of some of these titles is available, and you can go and read the first issue on the image.com website.
Excellent. It's a really good point, actually, because there's a huge amount of digital sales going on as well. Like Dark Horse are doing all digital at 50% off and the like.
Yeah.
And it's not just the big ones, obviously the small independent publishers as well. So the small press have been amazing with the response to some of them.
Yes.
What they've put online for free as well. And I think Ian and Nikki might be doing a bit of a special about that. I'm not sure.
Oh, well, yeah, that would be worth it. I know Pipe Dream Comics have tried to collect a lot of the free comics as well on their website, kind of directory. I did see that online. But yes, it's been a really good response. Now, genres. So we did bone up, we did have a little bit of a split, so we had a chance to kind of organise our thoughts and choose certain titles. So we need to work out what the first 2 genres that battle it out in the genre Thunderdome.
Right, well, I know my 2. So for the first match, left or right hand?
Left.
You will be playing against Romance.
Romance. Okay.
Right.
Right. Sport.
Romance versus sport. The eternal struggle. So what does that leave us for match 2 then? You've got Western playing against...
Crime.
Okay.
Big guns. So, I mean, that's quite interesting because certainly sport and romance haven't continually appeared on the racks, or been a big part of comic publishing. So do you want to start with romance?
Sure thing. Okay. It's a difficult one for me, this, or so I thought to begin with, because I definitely didn't think I read much romance. But, however, the genre really started post-World War II America. And you had comic writers and artists like Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who realised, actually whilst serving, that there was a market for more real-life stories. And that's when they started thinking about how they could represent these real-life stories and what the kind of main motif would be. That's where they started with the original big titles. They themselves did Young Romance comic, followed by very much the copycat Young Love. The initial audience is an interesting one too. It was kind of initially preteen girls, but very quickly those girls grew up and carried on buying, and they kind of grew the comics with their audience to make sure they didn't lose them. And it kind of petered out when it actually settled on the older teens to mid-20s audience. And it moved on from like the terrible childhood crush style stories to a lot more real life kind of, elder teen relationships, really. Mm-hmm. By the 50s, the sales of romance started to actually dent those of the superhero sales. I never realised that it had such a golden period for them. More and more publishers moved into the market. Romance-specific publishing houses sprang up even. Charlton Comics, Fawcett Comics, Quality Comics, and even DC all pumping out romance stories. Basically, there was such an appetite for them. These were tame by today's standards, as you can imagine. If you've seen this golden era covers, they really are. They're definitely not aimed at us, should we say. They're quite drippy, the covers, I have to admit. But they still try to kind of push the boundaries a bit. And again, that boosted popularity when they tried to, to be a bit more adult around the whole relationship idea. But that all came to the end in 1954 when the Comics Code Authority was formed. This particular comic history event affected, I think, so many different genres for so many different reasons. Yeah. And it just reshaped it. I must go, by the way, I am going to do a whole story about the Comics Code Authority at some point because it's hilarious.
Yeah.
If you've ever read any of the studies that were done at the time.
Yes.
The main principal idea was to pin comics completely as the cause of teenage delinquency. Mm-hmm. But what some of the most regarded psychologists in America at the time came out with and the conclusions they came up with, it's hilarious, but some of it's going to be quite hard to do in a family broadcast, podcast, I think, but it is funny. And of course, the main threat that CCA did to all of these kind of different genres was if they didn't toe the line, it wasn't that they were going to ban them outright. It was more to do with that they kind of forced them into self-censorship because they would withdraw their distribution outlets from them. That's what happened for a lot of them. Mm. It's the CCA code. I mean, it is quite insidious. if you think about the actual time here in the 50s, as you can imagine, just the general culture, that they were much better before the CCA came in, but post CCA, they were really forced to go completely with stereotypical sexism. In fact, it was almost as if it was purposely to foil post-war feminism. The women characters did all the pining. They were consigned to homemaking duties, but it was enforced that was the good thing.
Yeah.
They had to remain chaste and proper throughout, and woe betide if you didn't. Societal revenge was, like swift as well. And the only purpose that they had was to find a safe, stable marriage. It was all just geared towards that.
Oh, yeah.
There was an interesting title that I actually got a hold of digitally. I'll explain what the story is first before I give the title away. Basically, one actually starts off with quite an exciting love affair with a young sort of rebellious type. It's probably the best way I can describe him. A bit roguish, anyway. But she actually, by events, is forced to settle down with this stupendously boring but stable guy. And that is how she finds true happiness. It's just... I guess what raised an eyebrow was the title of the story is Backdoor Love. Okay. Simpler times, I think. Career ambition was totally vilified as well. And it just leads to losing the boy forever if you choose anything that's career related over him. I noticed as well. And even again into the Korean War, there was a pattern of women always being resigned to staying at home and pining for their love to return. And that kind of ends what is the traditional story of the romance genre, of its golden era. But all is not dead. It's basically just had to reinvent itself with the times. 93 was probably where an actual, what you would call a traditional romance was initially, and anyway, released. Strangers in Paradise by Terry Moore. And it was kind of touted as a romance strip. But quickly got expanded, I think, on popularity. What started out as a sort of simple love triangle expanded into a vast story of crime syndicates and political assassinations. But that was all very much by the by. It was a romance story. It was a simple, she likes him, he likes the other her likes the other her. That kind of. So it's an interesting one. And of course you've got all the big boys, like, I mean, I don't know whether you'd agree with this or not. Love and Rockets, I think, is actually quite heavily on the romance side. Totally. When I think about all the main storylines, it's all romance driven. I know it's life in larger, but Love and Rockets was the one I guess I suddenly started realising I do actually read modern romance, and more titles came up. Now, the biggest market in a modern sense is manga. I think it was, actually, it might have been as far back as the 70s, wasn't it? They started splitting the manga genres to shonen, which was the boys' comics. And that's killer robots, rampant cyborgs, and boy stuff. And then they tried to then redirect the shoujo manga for the young woman market, which I think it actually literally means young woman. And that's all the love and friendship kind of stuff. But again, reinvented, it's a lot about empowering a young girl. And with manga in general, the shoujo and the shonen markets have their adult versions of those same comics. And sometimes when I say adult, it's not particularly that they've altered the content, it's just read by adults. And I think that's it's one of those things with manga that I don't think translates over to the Western sort of comic style as much. It's always the young girls as heroes. It's all about their friendship, meeting boys. It's got to be true to life. And it kind of predated the sort of the Instagram generation, because it's very much about exotic locations and that perfect place for something to happen. I kind of flicked through a few, and it's quite intriguing. But again, it's not. It really is very much for the young girl audience. So it's not something that I'm supposed to get as such. But I was surprised at what a huge market it was when I went through. And it's evolved more. And I think it speaks a lot, generationally, that the shoujo manga is actually enjoyed by boys and girls equally now. It's the same with the shonen as well. Yes, they've remained true to, the spirit of, you've got your sword fights and your laser battles, and then you've got the relationships and riding ponies on the other side, but they're not specific to any sex anymore. And that's just the way that it's gone forward. It's interesting because the West has kind of caught up as well with manga a little. I think was it Canadian? There's a publisher called Harlequin, which is kind of like a hipper, but only ever so slightly, version of Mills and Boon. All right, and they were approached by Dark Horse, and they just did adaptations of all these Harlequin novels.
Cool.
And they're so successful. There is now a steady sort of like throughput of these kind of adaptations through over back to the East, which surprised me. I'd never heard of them before. By the look of your face, you hadn't either.
No.
I couldn't actually find any to read at all. Don't know anyone that had them or anything. But I'm kind of intrigued as to who in Dark Horse was doing them.
Right. So that they were released in a specific market, not through.
No, as far as I know, it was sort of like a general release. They were, but it's the big. I think it appealed obviously to the bigger market that was already over in Japan, and they kind of, but basically, it was what they initially thought was it was kind of to counter the manga coming over here that people were hoovering up. And it just so happened that they were good enough that manga lovers just absolutely fell in love with them as well.
Cool.
I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the big hitters now. I've got to say, Scott Pilgrim is another one, which it boils down to, if it's not romance, romance is the only thing that's holding that storyline together. Because it makes kind of no sense other than than wishful thinking and romance.
It's true. It's the inciting incident, isn't it? Definitely.
And with all of these things, I mean, I suddenly realised, actually, I do have a copy of the Harley Quinn Valentine special. And that is kind of, they've taken a romance story and they kind of grittied it up, shall we say? But
mad
at
love.
its heart, it's very much... it's very much a standard sort of almost 50 Stars love story that they've perverted. And I do quite like that. There's Moonstruck, which I started having a look at. It's kind of an LGBTQ kind of ensemble cast love story. And it kind of struck me a little bit with, if I carry on reading this, it's going to suck me in a little bit like Love and Rockets did. Although Love and Rockets for a few different reasons, but I was suddenly realising, okay. And I think they haven't shied away now from making romance the actual centre of a story.
Yeah.
For... even amongst comic strips, I'm thinking back, I suddenly realised from the 80s onwards, the X-Men had a huge amount of romance elements. With the New Mutants, anything that was actually based at the school had an awful lot of teen romance element to it. Yeah. And I don't think I even noticed, but it actually became it was integral to the plot a lot of the time.
Definitely.
And I think Saga as well is an interstellar forbidden love story.
Yeah.
I know people always sort of do mention Romeo and Juliet aspect to it, but again, it did strike me that. There's a few others, but I actually found something that I absolutely adored, sat down and read, and is the reason why I didn't complete as many notes on all of this as I wanted to. And I can't believe I missed this. And the concept is just so cool. They basically took the exact plot from a very old and dated teen romance story.
Right.
And they cyberpunked it. It's DC's 100%.
All right.
2002 to 2003. And it really is. It's just romance Blade Runner style. Everything is gritty, street level in it. And it's kind of an ensemble of stories. And there really is nothing to it. It purely is just 3 romance stories going on asynchronously.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you've recognised the cover, have you?
It's Paul Pope.
Yeah.
Paul Pope.
It's one of those things I saw, I just didn't grab at the time. And I don't think I've ever seen it.
No, 2002, 2003. I mean, I can't remember when, but he did work in Japan for one of the leading manga publishers.
Right.
Is it Kodansha? And I remember, in an interview, well, it says I'm on the page for the comic, but it mentions he described the experience as the equivalent of a grad school in education in how to tell stories the manga way. One concept he derived from his employment was the company's insistence on the importance of characters' internal conflict above all else. In this sense, Pope cites 100% in particular as his attempt at making an American manga.
Honestly, it's a 101 of character study.
Right.
Do you know, like within pages, you can capture somebody, just a couple of pages.
Yeah.
And then keep pulling at that and adding more layers.
Yeah.
It's really worth a read. It's kind of based around, well, a lot of the characters are based around, to begin with, what is the most disgusting kind of strip joint you could ever imagine. They're called gastro joints, and it's using virtual reality and sensors to be able to go that one step further and look inside a person's body.
Right.
It's quite a disgusting concept, but it's basically a gastro dancer kind of meets the bar hop. And it's such a sweet little kind of snarky romance and meet. And then you've got someone who is scared to live and suddenly starts carrying a gun, even though they're completely outlawed in that era. And then you've got like a weird performance artist who she kind of falls for. They end up kind of teaching each other different things. And then you've got a father of a child who's trying to get back with his ex. And what you think is happening is actually him trying to do just a completely selfless act to protect them. And
right.
I'll tell you, it ends nicely and it ends badly for some. And it's just a really good character study. And I have to admit, I would never have come across that if I hadn't just started just going through the research. That's a win for me.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably as far as I got on romance, because I kept reading 100%.
Well, I mean, you've got a more thorough cross section there of your genre than I did. Having in our initial draw, having pulled sport, I had similar thoughts in terms of what sport comics have I have. You instantly in this country think of Roy of the Rovers, and I was a voracious reader of comics. I would read my sister's comics, I would read any comics, I'd read the newspaper strips, but somehow I've managed to totally avoid Roy of the Rovers. I have got no idea of any part of that. There was the slight Mickey take in Viz, wasn't there? I would have read that. What was the Roy of the Rovers rip-off in or homage?
There's Billy the Fish.
Yeah, that was it. Billy Fish, yeah, which was superb. So I've read Billy Fish, and you kind of only know the references through that.
I was going to say, same with me. Absolutely. I'm not a football person.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, the thing about comics as well, and like you touched on it really in terms of genres, they're always mashed in some senses in some stories, and comics is obviously one of the places where the strangest spin is put on a lot of these genres, and it's the place that the mad scientist laboratory of comics can put things together in stranger ways. But equally, I'm more likely to have read them. So I have read I think the first book of Rock of the Reds, which was John Wagner, Alan Grant, and Dan Cornwell's book about an alien on the run who hides on Earth. I think he morphs into a double of quite a nasty footballer who's not quite as up on his game as he used to be. I think he's living the high life too much, and he's letting his career slide into the toilet. But this alien comes along, and his love of the game grows through the story, and there are lots of there's some of the tropes in there as well, that as he's succeeding and changing his ways, or being perceived as changing his ways, you've got the possibility of the small team being the giant killing success later on in the story as well. Aliens and crash landings and morphing into body doubles, that was fine by me. So obviously that kind of trumped the football element. So I remember, so that's probably, I thought, all I'd specifically got in common with sport comics until I started researching. And Wikipedia, did you know this? Wikipedia don't have sports in their list of comic book genres.
Wow.
And I think that's kind of reflective of weird space that sport as a comic genre is. And I know that there are other countries, and I know I have seen, tennis mangas, and I've seen baseball mangas, but again, I've not sort of picked them up, and I've not looked into them. So the funny things that stuck out to me when I was looking into sport as a genre is, like romance, it peaked in the 40s, and it was initially just baseball, I think, was one of the prevalent ones, and boxing were the ones that stood out when I looked into the genre. Pardon me. There was, I'm getting mixed up with my paper. Started to peak in the here we go. So yeah, boxing comics in the 40s. There was one called Big Shot Comics that featured a boxer called Joe Palooka, and that ran from 1945 to 1961. So that was, one of the longer running of the sport comics. There was another one called Prize Comics, which I had heard of before because it features the brilliant version of Frankenstein's monster that Dick Briefer was involved in. So that had been on my radar, but I didn't know about one of their characters, a boxer called Boom Boom Brannigan, the Pounding Professor. So of course I was like, oh, all right, okay, this sounds good. On hearing the brutal pronouncements of current heavyweight boxing champion Tiger Tyrone, college professor Dennis Brannigan decides to test his scientific pugilistic theory and become a boxer himself. It soon becomes clear that Tiger has won his fights through cheating and the aid of gangsters, so Professor Brannigan also takes them on. In the end, both criminals and Tiger are defeated by Brannigan, who, after winning the title fight, of course he does, against Tiger, is given the nickname Boom Boom Brannigan, the Pounding Professor. Boom Boom then announces that he will continue in his post of a professor at college and as the new heavyweight champion of the world. Along with facing an army of odd opponents in the ring, such as a shaved gorilla disguised as a human, a mind reader, a boxer who sold his soul to the devil, and a giant kangaroo. Boom Boom also deals with gangsters, zombies, and other malcontents outside the ring. Man, I think it was only 6 issues as well. I mean, that is, when you talk about the melting pot of comics, that's, as close to a kind of boxing comic that I am interested in, So I did avoid the straight manga tennis or this, but, a shaved gorilla disguised as a human, boxing, I'm there, I'm in. And I think that was one way that the sports genre has survived. It's not really ever quite, it seems, the main driving force, like you mentioned, a lot of romance books have become. The sport becomes, a lot of the time, incidental or part of a setting of the character. We've got, Slots was a brilliant book that I have mentioned before, but again, that's only 6 issues, but written and drawn by Dan Panosian. That is about a Vegas rogue called Stanley Dance, a bit of a con man, and he returns home to Vegas and confronts all the broken relationships that he's left behind, has to deal with it, turn himself around, and by going back into the ring is one of the ways that he tries to sort his life out. And it's not the main point of the story, but it does, like you were mentioning with romance, add the character beats and the confrontations with more visual heft, really, than a lot of the other dramatic areas. Southern Bastards, that's another one. There's more football in this book than there is boxing in Slots, but it's more of a crime book, really. The background is American football.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all ex-American footballers, isn't it? And homecoming of their quarterback.
Yes, but it's
didn't
also,
think of that one. Yeah,
the main villain is the Coach Boss.
Yeah.
Who is absolutely awful. He's an incredible villain. Written by Jason Aaron, art by Jason Latour, with a couple of issues by Chris Brunner. It's got such an atmosphere to it. It really does sort of seethe.
It's one of my comic books of last year.
Yeah.
So something you want to read and have an emotion afterwards.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So I'm really shoehorning it into the sport genre.
I'm
But he could have
tempted to
easily
almost say it was an anti-sport.
Yeah.
It's all about the negative connotations of American high school football, but
yeah, it's so well done.
But absolutely sports.
The art is absolutely amazing.
It is.
But that is where sport is used as a sideline to the story. The other way of just ramping up the comicness of sports stories was DC came out with I think they revamped Brave and the Bold for about 5-6 issues. I think it was late 60s, 70s, and they called it Strange Sports Stories. And this was, again, similar to Boom Boom Brannigan. This was them just adding other genre twists to the sports book. So we had the challenge of the headless baseball team. So we had an entire team of invisible men. Then we had, what's the other one now? I did save it. Oh yeah, The Man Who Drove Through Time. So you've got a sci-fi, meets Le Mans, sort of turn of the century Le Mans story. And of course, my favourite, which was Gorilla Wonders of the Diamond, which is about a gorilla baseball team. The cover of a gorilla with a massive grin sliding into fourth base, just beating the pitch. It's absolutely superb. And, the other intriguing thing about it was apparently, and I think Carmen Infantino was the editor-in-chief at the time, it's got a very strange storytelling sort of tick really to it, or every other panel is essentially a text panel with a small silhouette. So it's not a full comic. And strangely enough, as I was reading into it, they said that they wanted, they had the artistic problem of how to portray our stories in a way that the essential continuous action element of the sports would be maintained. And their idea of continuous action, which immediately my mind sprung to how well manga do it and how well kinetic speed. But they've got these, it does the very opposite, really. It breaks
it's
your
like
eye up.
It's like switching from television to radio.
Yeah, it is. It's really strange. And they do it all the way through all of the stories. So instead of breaking it, I don't know whether they thought that, I mean, obviously it should be show, don't tell. And it should be, less words, more pictures. And I think sport potentially is one of the few action, pieces that can be really well portrayed in comics. And it stood out as being a very awkward sports story, even with the extra genre twists. But that then left the last example, which I suddenly realised that the best example of a proper sports comic that I had actually read was looking, as I said, sport isn't listed as a genre in Wikipedia, but wrestling comics are. And I think,
yes, I know.
Wrestling, no matter what your opinion on whether it's a sport or not, there's a lot of wrestling comics out there. But the one wrestling comic that I had read, which ties in with an element of your talk as well, is Whoa Nelly, which is a 3-issue Jaime Hernandez Love and Rockets miniseries. Do you remember in volume 2? So, I mean, obviously, perfect. If you are craving comics, in self-imposed isolation, you could do no worse than picking up all of the run of Love and Rockets. I mean, it's been going since about 1983, something like that, I think. But it's gone through different formats. At the moment, we're on the 4th volume. It initially was a 50-issue run of a black and white newsprint magazine. So that started in about 83. I think it might have gone to about the 90s. It's very intermittently published.
It was definitely into the 90s, because that's when I first encountered it. It was about 91. Okay. And that was in a comic shop, so it was current stuff.
That was the magazine format.
And then they started rerunning it in 90, I think, or was it 91? They started rerunning it in Deadline.
Deadline, yes, they did. And that was volume 1. And then volume 2, the brothers decided to carry on with their characters, but in a different format. And they did a series of US standard-sized comics. So Gilbert did his Palomar books and was always a little more experimental with new characters and some different stories. And Jaime explored other characters like Penny Century and did, I think, a colour, Love and Rockets. But this particular book, Whoa Nelly, is 1996. And it's newsprint inside, it's black and white, and it tells the story of a female tag team, which ties in to the rest of the Love and Rockets universe. But it's a proper sports comic in the sense of it's all about wrestling is very firmly in the centre of the comic. It's what the characters are striving to succeed at. There's lots of relationships explored. It's put together, everything that he's done is gorgeous, but you get the little breaks of pin-ups of old female wrestlers. It's obviously something, I mean, reading in his biography, they were all massive wrestling fans, and he drew wrestling comics, I think, from an early age. So it's a real labour of love. And alongside the character stories and the trials and tribulations, it's broken up by these wordless fight scenes where you absolutely know what's going on. The personality of the fighters comes through. You've just got some sound effects, but the action that it just flows brilliantly, and it's all wordless, just as you would be watching it on the TV. You'd get the odd grunt or you'd get the odd sound, but you wouldn't hear what they were saying to each other. So it comes across brilliantly, and is probably the only true sporting comic that I have read.
Well, funnily enough, there was a couple I realised that I've also read.
Right.
And just to jump off the point you just this second made, didn't they do more than just wrestling? I believe, wasn't there some roller derby stuff?
Wasn't there some what, sorry?
Roller derby.
In Love and Rockets? Yes.
Hernandez was definitely the artist for a roller derby strip, I remember reading. Right. And I thought it was in Love and Rockets, but I'm just wondering maybe it wasn't. But I ended up, actually, off the back of that, I've read Roller Girls, which is a really good sports one. But right. Again, I was thinking about that, whether or not it kind of slotted in the romance a little bit. A bit like Love and Rockets does, I guess. Is it Gary Erskine did Roller Girls? Or was it the covers? Again,
not on my radar.
This was a while ago.
Mm.
But the first thing I thought of was 2000 AD Harlem Heroes.
Oh, of course.
That's my nearest I got into sport when I was a kid.
Yeah. Was that in? I mean, my peak 2000 AD was
early.
Yeah, my peak was DR and Quinch and Halo Joe.
No, pre that.
Yeah, see, I don't think I read...
It's pre-Prog 50 even, I think.
Yeah, I recognised them, and it would mainly be through probably the annuals where they would repeat some of the early stuff.
Yes, either repeat or they just do a one-off little...
Yeah, because there was that dinosaur character I remember I had in one 2000 AD series. So yes, I recognised the name, but I never read any of Harlan's heroes. Yeah, it's strange. It's a strange old genre, and like you said, it's interesting to explore the side that I really have absolutely no interest in.
I did accidentally read a manga sports one. It was genuinely accidentally, and it was like, I've got nothing else to do. It's awful. But that was about a girls' netball team. But it came up when I was searching. I can't remember the name of it now. It's actually quite a big title that's been going, that went for a long time, rather, I should say. But that was solidly in the romance sport crossover between both genres. But yes, I regretfully read that, is all I can say. It was also one of those where you pick up a manga book halfway through what was probably 50 books worth. So it made no sense whatsoever.
Right, so this is going to be interesting. So now we have to do our penalty shootout. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the idea is name a story and give a one-line synopsis.
Okay. So this is going to be... Oh, look, I've got one unfinished. Okay. Who's going to go first?
Yep, I'll go first, then you do yours, then we'll swap for the next. So the first penalty shootout is Strangers in Paradise. Ex-lesbian hooker and crime syndicate assassin Kachu loves Francine, who loves David, who of course loves Kachu.
Okay, I've got strange sports stories, the very definition of what the mad laboratory of comics does to a genre. It's obvious winner there, Strangers in Paradise.
I'll put that down as a win.
I don't think he's looking good for sport. I think I was the wrong champion. Sorry, sport.
I don't think any of us could have done it better.
Yeah, somebody had to take the bullet.
Penalty 2 then. You go.
Oh, okay. Slots. Masterful mix of engaging characters, stylishly presented with a bit of boxing.
Red Romance. A tale of love in America's emerging Communist Party, ill-fated after being banned by both the CCA and Senator Joseph McCarthy, an ill-conceived idea from Cat Food Comics.
Oh, that's torn me. Whoa. That sounds really good. I think we might have to go for the Cat Food Comics one, always.
Cat Food for the win. Oh, it's me next, isn't it? Scott Pilgrim, fight for your right to date Ramona Flowers.
Southern Bastards. A steamy, hot, dangerous book full of venomous violence and gorgeous artwork.
Oh, I'm sorry, Scott, but I've got to go with Southern Bastards every time.
So good. Was it me?
It is.
Okay. Boom, boom, Brannigan. Let me read from my synopsis again. Faces an array of odd opponents in the ring, such as a shaved gorilla disguised as a human, a mind reader, a boxer who sold his soul to the devil, and a giant kangaroo. Boom.
I'll go with Alex and Ada, Sojo manga of boy meets girl, bot. And I'm sorry, but yeah, I think you've got the winner on that one. I want to see shaved gorilla boxing.
It's so good, isn't it? Man alive. So you for the last one.
Love and Rockets. Full stop.
Whoa, Nelly. Funny, touching story interspersed with wordless, bone-crunching action scenes, which, technically, is Love and Rockets. So it's Love and Rockets for the win.
It's Love and Rockets for the win.
So that means...
we have a clear winner.
Yep, that's a shoe-in for Romance.
So Romance Comics goes through to the quarterfinals.
Nice. Oh, that went all right.
I think we've established that neither of us know sport because we obviously neither of us really know how World Cup works either.
But also, once you've been through one, we'll have a better idea for next time, because I think I've almost done my sentences, I think, in my review, and then we can so. Okay, so let me start with crime then.
Yeah.
So crime, similar to Romance, it really got its heyday in the 50s, and particularly with EC's run of Crime Does Not Pay. That was the one that really hit the ground running in the 40s. That was the most prevalent sort of gang busting sort of crime book, but was a little more moralistic. I think that was took on more of the kind of angle of, the criminal always paid for his crime. And then we had true crime comics in the late 40s with Jack Cole, famous for creating Plastic Man. And that was the famous book where the famous injury to the eye motif image. Did you come across that when you looked up, the Comics Code? That was the famous image that was used in the Senate subcommittee.
Yeah.
That was drawn by Jack Cole, and it was the image. It's a panel from a dream sequence in which a girl has her eye held open and threatened with a hypodermic needle, and that image launched, the name of the motif, the injury to the eye motif. Joe Simon and Jack Kirby jumped on the bandwagon, of course, with Prize Comics, and they started doing, I think, Guilty, true police cases. Jack Kirby himself actually appeared on a photo cover for one of these crime books from this period. Oh. Some of them actually had photo covers, and Kirby, I think he's a thug. I think Joe Simon might have actually dressed up as a policeman, one of them as well. Justice Traps the Guilty. So it's been a real staple, I think, of the comics industry. It obviously really caused the biggest impact on the industry with EC's publishing of crime, suspense stories, and the shocking imagery and the elements within the tales that really were seen to be beyond the pale for most parents and educators of the time. Alongside the horror books, it fueled the Senate subcommittee on juvenile delinquency. Most of the panels that were displayed were from EC books, from the crime and horror stories. And as you said, the Comics Code Authority was pretty much established to put EC Comics out of business. So we ended up with EC Comics turning into a magazine company rather than a comic company, and setting up Mad Magazine. And Crime Story.
Am I right in saying that was kind of the get around some of the Comic Code Authority as well? Because it only actually applied to non-magazine size or something. That was
exactly why it was a comic code. So to basically, I mean, I think he's right as well. It was is it William Gaines I get McGaines mixed up, but I think it's William Gaines is the son. He essentially took it that Comics Code was put in place. All of the words that were used that were banned from the covers of the comics were words that were used in their titles. Yeah. The specific mentioning of supernatural creatures and not being allowed in comics. It was all, and they were the most successful comic company at the time. So he moved to being a magazine so that he didn't have to deal with. And Mad Magazine was, obviously massively successful. But it did remain a real staple of the industry. And one of the earliest examples that I started off with, of course, is The Spirit. I mean, that was one of the pinnacles of the industry. It started in the early 40s. It was a supplement that Eisner was asked to come up with, partly because the newspapers were realizing that comics were so successful. Previously, the one place you could get comics was in the newspaper. Now you could get just comics from newsstands. And they went to Eisner, and he delivered, what was different from other crime comics. It wasn't necessarily always moralistic. It didn't always follow the crime does not pay. You would follow the criminal in sometimes quite a sympathetic way. His storytelling was obviously cinematic. He was influenced by cinema and the characters he introduced, but they also had a more romantic and quirky elements that he included. There was some sci-fi characters and themes towards the 50s. I think they had the outer space spirit stories, much like when Dick Tracy suddenly ended up moving to the moon briefly. So, The Spirit set, I think, the bar very early on for the very best of crime comics. And when DC got the license briefly in 2000s, one of the other giants of modern crime comics got involved, and that was Darwin Cooke. He did 12 issues of The Spirit, writing and drawing, and they are absolutely amazing. He got the tone just right. I think he introduced some modern elements, but it definitely felt like The Spirit. And then previously he'd worked on Catwoman with Ed Brubaker, where they had Slam Bradley guesting and doing some backups there, so that the crime chops of those stories are worth exploring if crime comics are what you crave. But the real pièce de résistance that he moved on to was the Parker graphic novels. And he adapted the work of Richard Stark into 4 books. And 2 were collected into a big hardback collection called the Martini edition, which is just gorgeous. I've got the individual books, but I haven't got the Martini edition. That awesomely produced, stylish as all hell. You'd obviously realise that with Darwin Cooke being involved. But another link then onto other famous crime comic creators is that they are developing, I think it's due to be released at the end of the year, the last 2 books, The Score and Slayground, are being combined into an oversized slipcase edition called the Martini Last Call edition. And what makes this collection special is, as well as the 2 books being included. It's also got never before seen Parker artwork by Darwin Cooke. It's got a round table talk with Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, Bruce Timm, and Scott Dunbier, the editor-in-chief, I think, or one of the senior editors at IDW. And they're talking about Parker and Cooke. And then there's a brand new 17-page story by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. A brand new Parker story. And it's obvious that he was a guest at, I think he was a guest the year before I couldn't make it, to the Lakes Festival. It's an amazing tribute. I mean, Darwin Cooke and Parker, really difficult to beat in terms of crime stories, and to have Brubaker and Sean Phillips involved in something involving Parker is fantastic as well. Brubaker and Phillips are the go-to crime creators in comics at the moment. Pretty much all of their work that they've done teamed up together involves crime in some way. As we've mentioned with romance and sport, the crime element is often difficult to quantify in terms of how much the quota becomes before it's a crime book. But Criminal, Kill or Be Killed, The Fade Out, Fatale, they've all got a crime element. I think the new book that was due to be released, I think in May, called Pulp, apparently Sean Phillips asked Brubaker to write a Western, and he delivered a story about, I think there's a pulp writer that's involved in some shenanigans, and there's a bit of crime, and there's a Western story in there as well. So even the Western story that Phillips asked for has the usual crime included, or crime elements included. But Criminal, if you've got the time and want to do a deep dive into, I think what we're looking at now, probably about 6-7 volumes that follow a connected group of criminals, their families, their friends. It starts with Coward, which is the story of a professional pickpocket who's involved in a lot of heists, and he's always super well prepared. He knows what's going on. He's so clued up, but obviously something goes wrong, and that puts him on the run. And it's the introduction to the criminal universe. I think it's one of those great sets of books that I don't think it really matters what order you read them in. There's different introduction to different time periods throughout the books. So it was the first book that they did in creator-owned for Marvel. I think it's Marvel's Icon, but it's now published by Image. So this is one of the ones that you can read the first issue of on the Image website, as well as the other standout. Well, it's not under all standout, but Kill or Be Killed is also available, the first issue of that. And it's different. It's different feel. They're all got, a different feel to them, but this is a more kind of enclosed story of a young man who's haunted by a demonic presence that forces him to kill a person every month, which is it's a great premise. But it's very dark, twisty turny story of how it starts to ruin his life. He tries to keep it secret. It affects his relationship with his loved ones and his parents. And it's been optioned as a movie, which
it has, yeah.
Yeah, that's
really
going to be
looking forward to see what they
incredible thriller. Yeah, really will. But also, in typical Brubaker fashion, he does sort of examine vigilanticism in it, which is the staple of comics to a very great degree. And there's a real knowing nod to comics history in there as well, which they managed to include in lots. It might just be names, or it might, be allusions to comic strips or elements included in the story, like there are in Criminal. There's a newspaper strip artist is one of the main characters in one of the stories. And yeah, I think all of their issues are available. So Criminal, Kill or Be Killed, The Fade Out and Fatale, it's amazing. And other modern examples, 100 Bullets. I mean,
yeah,
that's a great run. If you want a deep dive, I think there is it 11 books, 10?
It's one of those. I've read so much, and yet none in a coherent order.
Yeah,
with huge gaps in between. But it's superb series.
I jumped in quite late. I remember seeing it, but it was my wife's cousin who'd started to read it, and he'd asked me if I'd read it, and he was like, "Oh, you should." And man, as soon as I started, I was lucky enough to have a good run of graphic novels to get through, but then did have to wait for the last couple to come out and get collected. So, but it's amazing. I mean, Brian Azzarello wrote it, Eduardo Risso drew it. It's stunning. I spend half my time just looking at Risso's backgrounds. I find them so interesting, how much you can fill in with pools of black. It seems it's incredibly atmospheric, and it definitely pulls you in. The premise is that there's a strange man named Agent Graves who approaches people who have been victimized in one way or another. He gives them a handgun, 100 bullets, evidence that one person is responsible for all their woes, and a simple message that the bullets are completely untraceable. Any law enforcement organisation will automatically stop the investigation that has been committed with one of these bullets. Whether or not these people use the 100 bullets to take revenge is up to them, and often becomes a key part of the story. And it starts off quite sort of episodic, but becomes a lot more connected. And it's been a while since I've reread them, but I do remember it becomes a much more overarching story before it gets concluded. And then one last modern crime story. That's a bit more different. I know I've banged on about some of these comics endlessly on this podcast. Some I just can't, you just can't get out of the system, quite frankly. As soon as somebody mentions a crime comic, those 4 comics just instantly fill my brain. And just the excuse to be able to pull my Eisner books off the shelf again, or my 100 Bullets, or any of the Sean Phillips stuff. But there is a new one that I recently picked up, and that's Crowded. Have you seen Crowded?
No.
Again, another Image book, so you can read the first issue for free. But it's, I'll read you the synopsis. 10 minutes in the future, the world runs on an economy of job shares and apps, including Reaper, a crowdfunding platform to fund assassinations. Charlie Ellison leads a quiet, normal life until she's suddenly targeted by $1 million Reaper campaign. Hunted by all of Los Angeles, Charlie hires Vita, the lowest rated bodyguard on the Defend app. As the campaign picks up speed, they'll have to figure out who wants Charlie dead before the campaign's 30 days or their lives are over. And it's most of the creators, I know they have done a fair bit of work for DC, I think, and Marvel. The writer Chris Sabella has written Harley Quinn, and the artists Rose Stein and Ted Brandt, they've worked for Marvel and DC. And it's up there for the first issue for free.
It sounds intriguing. It's intrigued me already, actually. That's quite. I like a synopsis like that.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it's just reminded me of the way Westworld is going at the moment, if you've caught up. But excellent.
It does seem to alternate as well at the moment, the Westworlds, which I hope the point of each episode. No spoilers, but I'm hoping that continues as well. But I wanted to throw in something that was perhaps I'd not mentioned before, but it's a recent discovery. They were due, I think Ro Stein and Ted Brandt were due to appear at the Swansea Comic Con. But unfortunately, like everything else, that's something else that's been cancelled. So to miss out on meeting them, but awesome. Really, really enjoying the book at the moment. So, Western.
Over to Westerns. A lot of the things we're probably going to say has kind of been covered a little bit about how things evolve.
Yeah.
But I guess a quick 101. Western comics, the great American Wild West, life and death on the frontier. Westerns were a staple of American media, from books to radio to comics, for obvious reasons. It's the great part of American history that kind of binds America. I mean, comic-wise, it started out as short newspaper strips in the 1920s, but as the comic book age of publishing dawned, Westerns were there from the start, basically just mirroring the plots and themes from the radio and TV shows. And the golden era was 48 to 60. They were hugely popular across the pond. Never grabbed, I don't think, the UK audience in the same way, but again, obviously from the historical sense, it's not part of our culture, I guess. I mean, a brief skip through some of the most famous titles, and it seemed to be mandatory to have the word kid in the title. Durango Kid, Two Gun Kid, Wyoming Kid, Apache Kid, Rawhide Kid, Outlaw Kid, Billy the Kid. I mean, it just seemed like it was the law, or you were only guaranteed success if you had the word kid in the title. I mean, the UK did have its titles. The original Eagle had the Riders of the Range series that ran for 2 years from 1950. I mean, I suppose stepping back from that, Desperate Dan started in 1937. I didn't realise that. Honestly, didn't realise it was that old.
No, I don't think I did.
I think it had an anniversary, didn't it? And at some point, I remember, but I never clocked the time. You know what anniversary it was. The Dandy had the Daring Deeds of Buck Wilson. Is it? I'm sure that's what Viz takes the rip out of a lot. It was one of those styles where it's a picture at the top, black and white picture, and mostly text underneath.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a bit like the Viz comic. Was it the boy in his bin bag and his border bin bag?
Yeah. Black bag, border. Border.
Bin
the
bag.
border bit, yeah. Black bag, the border bin bag.
It's kind of that style. And I'm sure that I've always taken that's what it was a riff on. There was another one actually in the Beano, which I remember pictures of, but no way was it ever published when I was a kid. Little Plum, which was of an Apache version of Dennis the Menace. And I now realise why they don't kind of mention it anymore, because it's racially insensitive at the very least, having seen some of the first images that come up anyway. So I think we're a little beyond that, hopefully, nowadays. But in the 50s, you had Kit Carson, which was actually, it was based on a real person, but then fictionalized. It's kind of a weird story behind it. But I was surprised to find out that 2000 AD favourite Ian Kennedy was actually on artist duties for something like that back then. That really surprised me. And there was Buck Jones and Buffalo Bill, and all of those appeared in the Comic, which I think I've heard of, and I'm wondering whether or not John Freeman did a Down the Tubes on it or something, or
right. That would make
something
sense.
like that.
Yeah,
made me aware of the comic. But yeah, it was Wild West Stories was quite a thing for it. But the golden era really ended with a very sudden and severe decline in the 60s. The Western titles seem to be massively replaced by war titles. I think it's a cultural American thing. It was the last sort of conflict era, and then World War II came along, and that seemed to be their new kind of fiction output. But of course, superheroes just kind of started smashing it from the 60s onwards, really.
We did have the TV invasion, of course, as well.
That's true.
So you had the TV invasion and the stock staple TV show of the late 50s and 60s was cowboy and western. And I think that was the big advantage of superheroes at that time was, even though you had the Superman and Batman movie serial, they weren't really,
exactly
displaying superheroes in
and better than the comics.
Yeah.
I mean, Superman on the radio was better than Superman, to be honest, for a long time. But there you go. I mean, there was an absence of what I'd call pure Western comics, really, until revival in the 70s. And that's the point where there was a divergence. You wanted the Western themes, but it's where Weird West as a genre started to grow. And that's basically the introduction of fantastical elements around what is basically a bog standard Western framework. And that's pretty much how it's gone on to survive. I think people were kind of a bit weary maybe of just frontier life a little bit, and the fantastical elements they merged into it kind of made it a much more accessible story. In 72, Weird Western Tales kind of set the pace, I think, for the rest of the industry. And it's one of those odd things where DC kind of got the jump on Marvel. Because by 75, you had characters like Jonah Hex getting his own series. And I think Scalp Hunter got his own. And I'm not sure whether El Diablo did or not, or whether he always seemed to be in other people's comics.
Yeah.
Again, all stuff I read much later than 75, but I do actually remember all these characters. Jonah Hex has to be the most famous. Scalp Hunter evolved quite a lot, didn't he?
They would
into out of Western stories, really.
Well, Hex was the famous sort of 80s where he gets flung into the future and he's got like a laser pistol. But you also had, they would meet different characters. Batman would team up with Scalp Hunter and Jonah Hex in Brave and Bold.
Scalp Hunter, I think, probably more on the crossover front. A lot more. Wasn't there his... it's too long ago. Was it Scalp Hunter's son became so-and-so, and he was a lot more embedded, I think, into the general DC multiverse than Jonah Hex was for a long time.
Yeah.
But Jonah Hex comics, I remember those being around when I was a kid.
Yeah.
It wasn't a cup of tea back then, I have to say. But I kind of appreciate them a bit more now. It was Marvel, funnily enough. They kind of tried to press on with the traditional Western format for quite a long time after the decline. The Mighty Marvel Western title, they started just rerunning reprints of the Rawhide Kid, Two Gun Kid, and Kid Cole. Once again, keeping with a successful kid in the title.
Kid approach.
And they were all just reprints from the 50s and 60s. And it was they were heavily featuring artists Jacks, Kirby, and Keller. But by 2000, Weird Western had kind of won over traditional almost completely. And you started getting some really breakout series. Preacher is at its heart a Western. Loveless, High Moon if you like your werewolf shenanigans. And they kind of paved the way to even more and more. A year or so ago, I did an episode about one of my favourite subgenres, and that's the space western. It really is a favourite of mine. I went through every space western film, comic book, everything. I covered greats like Copperhead is an amazing comic. And of course, the best sci-fi western of all time, Firefly. And when it comes to western values, it really outstrips Star Wars. Firefly was a wonderful series, but I really do like the comic adaptations. And they don't particularly take the story forward. What they do is they fill in what Firefly, the series, didn't give you. And I think they do it in a really good way. Warren Ellis's Ignition City is another huge recommendation of mine. It doesn't come across as a western. It's like an alternate reality thing. It's 1956, but it initially people would say it was diesel punk as a genre, a subgenre. But it's about a girl arriving in an outlaw town to find out more about her father, and it's absolutely western in its roots. And I really do rate that one. Manga, however, just out weird west everyone, and their output dwarfs anything from the big two or the indies. There's a lot to wade through, but Moonlight Hare was one that I had read, and I did like that. That's kind of a crikey. What's the synopsis? It would be. It's kind of like a young. He wasn't Apache. He was Sioux Indian lad, and he knows that he's got this prophecy ahead of him, and he knows he's either going to be the doom or the savior of his people. It's the best way to describe it, and it's kind of reaching that conclusion. It's a really, really nice story. You've got the big hitters like Trigun, which is just sci-fi western, ridiculous. It's just a bloodfest. It really is. Trigun is so massive. It really was. I mean, Green Blood was one that I've always wanted to read, but I've never got a copy of it. I do know that it's a western, but it's actually set not on the frontier, but basically about New York, 5 points. So you're talking like Gangs of New York era. Right. And it's just one that's kind of intrigued me because a few people I know mention things about it in podcasts. And then there's Buffalo Five Girls, which we can't talk about on this podcast. All I've got to say on that. I have to say, myself and Alison, about a year ago, for some reason, I don't know what it was we caught. I think we caught the remake of... what's it called? Can't even remember the title of it. Is it the 810 to Yuma?
Oh, yeah.
910. I don't know. I can't remember the title now. There was a remake done with Christian Bale anyway. Yeah, and we kind of watched it and thought, oh, yeah, I quite enjoyed that. We'll stick another Western on. And we started basically really hankering after proper Western films, but new ones. Yeah. So and there has been some absolutely amazing ones done, and we just keep discovering more and more and more, and they seem to have really top-notch actors and actresses in, and yet they don't seem to bother the cinema or even like online streaming for some reason, and it's got me actually wanting a proper traditional Western comic, and I'm struggling.
Yes, Shakin did. He did one. It was a graphic novel, sort of a little more turn of the century. It was named after the town. I know he did some. What was he? He did a Rawhide Kid. I think he might have drawn that. But what's the one? Western. The only other one I would mention, actually, again, it's a bit more of a twist. Century West. That's right. Century West is I think a pretty standard, not standard, but not genre influenced.
Right.
But yeah, Genre West. It's a longer graphic novel, I think, by Howard Chaykin, but also one that's got a bit more of a genre twist, but is a great Western, is Sixth Gun from Oni Press. And that is about the introduction of six ancient weapons that can assume different forms, and the power it gives to its bearer, and then the extra power, obviously, when they're collected, and all of the different forces that are pursuing them. And at the moment of the story, it's set in the Wild West time, so all of the weapons have taken six-gun form. Yeah. And there's a motley, you've got shamans, you've got a sort of sideshow mummy, Thunderbirds, you name it, and it's all mixed in with a kind of real weird sorceress sort of backstory, secret societies, Pinkertons. It's absolutely brilliant. Oni Press. Cool. Right. Okay. Well, let's.
You're ready for a penalty shootout.
Hit the West first against crime. So. Okay, let me go first. Crowded. Fun, crazy action movie style read with sleek kinetic art.
Trigun. Rootin' tootin' gunslinging bounty hunter manga madness. And I'm going to vote for yours outright because I'm really, really intrigued by that. So you've got a win there.
Okay. It's a plus.
I've got that written down.
Yeah, well, the first issue's available. I tell you what, you could really just go to town and give everything a try on the first issue. It includes so many good books, and in every genre we're talking about, it's probably going to be represented on the image page. Be interesting to find one that's not. Okay, over to you.
Hiroki Samura's Emerald. Femme fatale and a literally one-armed bandit do bad.
100 Bullets. Unbeatable graphic pulp noir.
Yeah, you've got to win there as well, because I love 100 Bullets. So I really only picked this one because it actually had a one-armed bandit in it. Frankenstein, Texas. There's a new sheriff in town and he's already dead.
Ooh, that sounds good. I've got Criminal. Creators at the top of their game, consistently impeccable.
I might have to defend Frankenstein, Texas a bit more on this one. The artist was stood opposite you last festival. And I haven't got the book. Damn it, I did a review of it as well. I haven't got the book at hand, sorry.
Roger Langridge?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
Oh, really?
It was one of his, I think. Yeah, he was by the door, wasn't he?
Yeah. Next to Prolic. Yeah.
Yes.
The mighty Prolic. Oh, brilliant.
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Oh, cool. I'm going to look that up. Yeah, okay. We'll give you that one. It was...
Support your fellow artist.
He did another Frankenstein strip. He did... it was something like Frankenstein meets Shirley Temple in an A1 book. What would that be? Mid-90s? Cracking bunch of creators alongside him. But he does an outstanding Frankenstein as well. That's superb. Okay, so whose go is it?
You. Okay. You first. This is for the fourth penalty.
Parker. Beautiful, chic, classy, dapper, dressy, polished, sleek, slick, smart, and snazzy.
I've gone with sci-fi western Copperhead. J. Ferber's tale of a frontier planet's new sheriff, Clara, dealing with alien hillbillies, corrupt mining tycoons, and rowdy alien co-workers. I was looking up Parker just now. I think I'm going to concede a win to you on that one because it sounds like something I could get into, but it's going to be an investment.
Yeah.
Time-wise, I mean.
Well, to be honest, there's only 4. I think one he literally got, I think, a sort of mini comic of one book that he condensed into a sort of couple of chapters in the front of one. But they can be very fast reads because they're dialogue driven. They're the opposite of that. There's little dialogue, and the art drives it. It's definitely show, not tell.
Right.
And it really is. It's more a case of how long you just want to luxuriate in it, because the whole thing. They're a lovely, really well made hardback. Of the ones I've got are as well. Different coloured highlight each time, so it's black and white with just one highlight of colour, but they're absolutely amazing.
I do love Copperhead, but it is really just 3 trade backs. That's it.
Yeah,
I quite fancy sort of investing in a. You've mentioned a few now, I think, actually, to be fair, that are going to be a much longer running series to sort of slowly get into. So
yeah. Well, hopefully,
I'm happy to give the win to Parker on that one.
Cool. Okay, well, it is unbeatable then, crime. But do you want to go with the last one?
Final one for me is Firefly, the greatest, shiniest space western in the whole damn verse. You just try and take the sky from me.
Right, well, I counter with The Spirit, the granddaddy of classy comics, an influence on so many creators, and still a benchmark against which other comics are judged.
Well, I know what The Spirit means to you, and you know what Firefly means to me. So I think we might have to call a draw on that one.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
So,
okay.
Tossing that up, that's a win for crime.
It's a crime. So that means that the quarterfinal is crime versus romance, is it? Or are we going to have another draw once we've got? I don't know how it works.
Like I said, we're making this up as we go along, but originally it was going to be crime versus romance.
Okay. Well, we can leave it at that for now and then see how it goes. That's a good combination, actually. Crime versus romance.
It's not a bad one, actually. They're kind of opposed-ish, sort of. And yet there's such a massive overlap. I'm just thinking of the last American Crime I reviewed in my last segment. That's a massive overlap into crime and romance.
Yes. They're often bedfellows. Brilliant.
That's superb.
Right. Well, I know you've got your food delivery due soon, so we should probably.
Yeah. This is the modern thing that you're staying in for.
This is the highlight of the day, isn't it? I know.
Hey, more booze.
Brilliant. All right. Well, if you're still here, thank you for listening. If you do have any comments, or you think we got it completely wrong, or you want to tell us about genre favourites in any of the genres we discussed today, then you can hit me up on Twitter at thismanthispete. And yeah, at the moment it's best on Twitter, really. I'm not really on Facebook, and I haven't been on Instagram for a while, so
I was going to say,
yeah.
I'm at Cthulhu Punk on Twitter, and it's at Comic Art Podcast.
Yes.
Is the podcast one.
One last thing as well. If you do need an extra project, and who doesn't these days, can I suggest that you look into the Lakes International... Oh, got a frog in my throat. Lakes International Comics Art Festival competition. This year it is called Race into Space. There is a top prize of £500. They're after 4 to 6 pages of a comic that is a tale of daring do heroes and heroines, human, alien or otherwise, in an adventure set in outer space. It must introduce the character and their world in a short and exciting story with a twist at the end. So it's open to all, I believe. So check out the info at comicartfestival.com. Brilliant. Nice one, Mike. So I think we already know what genres we're going to be talking about next time, don't we?
Yeah, for the next group, I suppose we can give a spoiler alert, can't we?
Yeah.
It's post-apocalypse, reality/documentary, horror, and TV/film adaptations.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Nice one. Right. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you soon, Mike.
Till next time.
Thank you for listening. Find out more about the festival at comicartfestival.com. Find out more about the show and how to contact us at comicartpodcast.uk. Find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Music composed by Pop Noir.
This podcast is part of BritPod Scene, an independent network of uniquely British podcasts that's always growing. Check out BritPodScene.com or BritPod Scene on Twitter to find out more.